This evening, I spoke to Senator Angus King, an independent from Maine who caucuses with the Democrats and, importantly, sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I started out by asking him whether he could make any pledges about how the practices of his committee will differ from what we've seen from his colleagues in the House Intelligence Committee.
Well, Brian, we are really working hard to make it bipartisan. It's not easy, but we're working at it. The committee is only it's 8 to 6 to 1. It's 8 Republicans, 6 Democrats, and me. So it's a very carefully balanced committee. We've got good members on both sides, and everything we are doing now is to maintain a bipartisan approach to it. And I'm hoping that we're going to be able to come out with a unanimous report, because I think that's important. What's disturbing about what's going on in the House is when the report, a report finally comes out from either their committee or ours, it's got to be credible. And that's why what happened last week, I think, undermines the credibility of what the House is doing. We're trying very hard to avoid that.
The Democratic leader, Mr. Schumer from New York, yesterday said that Nunez should step aside from his job as head of the committee. Do you agree?
Well, I think that's his decision, and that's the decision of the House committee. I think it's I don't feel comfortable deciding what he should do, but I do think it was a mistake. And as I say, I think it's compromised the ability of their committee to come out with a credible report, and he's got to weigh that.
Are you making any pledges to folks about the amount of testimony you want to remain public in open session that we can look at, that we can televise, as opposed to what really, because of secrets, must be an executive session?
I think we ought to have as much public as possible. In fact, our first hearing is tomorrow. It's going to be an open hearing in 2 parts, probably about 4 hours. I think having it in public is part of the process of producing a credible report. If we go behind closed doors for 6 months and then come out with a piece of paper and say this is what happened, I don't think that's going to cut it with the American people. So, and also, Brian, a big part of this is educating the American people about what the Russians are up to, so that they'll know the next time that this is what the Russians do. And I've talked to people in Eastern Europe. I said, how do you defend yourself against this? They're doing it all the time over there. You know what they said? They say, everybody knows it's the Russians. They say, oh yeah, that's just the Russians. We need to have our people understand this isn't a one-off. They're going to continue to do this. They're going to come after us in a variety of ways. And that's why I think it has to be as public as we can possibly make it.
You're one of the senators who took the ride over to Langley to look at intelligence, which we know you can't share. You've seen all the smoke signals. However, how much fire, in your view, granted before your investigative work starts, how much fire do you think is here?
Well, I think there are 3 parts of it, Brian, and I know what you're referring to, but the first part is, what did the Russians do in our election? And that's pretty well established, and there's a lot of fire there. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt it was the Russians. It went all the way to the top. They intended to interfere with our elections. That's part 1. Part 2, I think, is what all the public interest is. Was there some cooperation between the Trump campaign and the Russians? That is what we're going to be digging into, along with the first part. But there's a third part that hasn't gotten as much publicity that I think in the long run may be of very great significance, and that is the Russians were also trying to probe and attack our state and local level voting systems, voting machines, registration rolls, and they were doing it. As near as we can tell, all the intelligence is it didn't succeed. They didn't change any votes, but they weren't doing it for fun. They were probing and experimenting, and they're going to keep at it. So I think that's something we're really going to have to work with the states and the localities, how to keep the integrity of the voting system. Imagine, Brian, if they had managed to change 100,000 votes in Michigan and Wisconsin, and we could determine that. It would be chaos, and that's, of course, exactly what they want. So that's a piece that I think is also very important.
You probably don't agree with Dick Cheney on much, but did you agree when you heard him call this an act of war at a conference over in India?
had not heard him say that, but I said that about a week after it happened. It's pretty, I don't know how you define that term, but this is an attack on the United States. Another way to think of it is, what if they had dropped in 6 or 8 paratroopers in the middle of the night, broken into the Democratic National Committee, stole the computers, put them on their arms, and took off in a submarine down the Potomac River? Who would not call that an act of war? That's effectively what they did. This is very serious stuff, and they're doing it now in France. They're doing it in Germany. They do it in Eastern Europe as a regular thing. They've learned how to wage war on the cheap. And that's what this is all about, and that's why it's so serious, and it's not going to stop. And it's a nonpartisan issue, Brian. Marco Rubio, who's on our committee, gets that. He keeps saying, look, folks, next time this could be us. Putin is not a Democrat, and he's not a Republican. He's an opportunist and a bad guy, and if it suits his purposes 2 or 4 years from now, he could just as soon turn his guns against the Republicans. So that's why this has got to be, I believe, a totally bipartisan investigation because the stakes are so high.
Senator, have you determined how you're going to vote on the Gorsuch nomination?
I have not. I've really been working it, Brian. I had a listening session up in Maine, over 600 people, 4 hours, 77 people spoke. Everybody had their say. I went to his hearing, even though I'm not on the Judiciary Committee. I've read many of his opinions, read articles about him, met with him. I'm still trying to figure this guy out, and I haven't decided yet one way or the other. I'm going to wait and see. A friend of mine on the committee put in some questions that I thought were important. I want to see the answer to the questions that he's going to file, I think, in the next couple of days. So, this is a very weighty vote. Most things we do around here can be amended and changed next year. This is a 30 to 40 year decision. He's going to be there for a long time if he's confirmed, and that's why I think we've really got to try to do our very best to understand what his philosophy and temperament is, and that's certainly what I'm trying to do. And I'll reach a conclusion, but I'm not ready yet.
Senator Angus King of the state of Maine, we had tried to find a louder hallway to put you in, but we were unable to find one, so I hope this will suffice.
Hey, welcome to my world.
Thank you, Senator, very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, sir.
And one